Yo, hey, this shit easy, nigga. Hey, all I'm talking about, nigga, I'm still out here trying to get it.
Contender Regime Boxing, checking back in with y'all, man. What's good? So I want to talk about a topic, man, surrounding the Errol Spence and Terence Crawford fight. The biggest fight in the sport, the biggest fight in combat sports, period. Easily one of the most anticipated fights in the last 15 to 20 years. Easily top 5 most anticipated fights in the last 15 to 20 years. If this fight happened, 20 years ago, let's say if this fight happened, let's say 10 years ago, easily a million pay-per-view buy fight, easy. That's the type of fight this is. Amongst the hardcore fans, it's probably, I'm not even going to say probably, I know for a fact that this is, from the consensus, this is the number one fight that's on demand. And I guess you could say with the casual fans as well. Errol Spence and Terence Crawford is one of the fights that have a lot of casual fans even interested in boxing right now. But of course, we all know that the hardcore boxing fans, man, this is something that we've been craving for some time now. And I wanted to talk about a particular aspect of this fight. Terence Crawford, taking on Errol Spence. Errol Spence taking on Terence Crawford, but more so from Terence Crawford's perspective, being, was a 3-division champion, was undisputed at 140. Every performance has been dominant. Every performance. Terence Crawford hadn't really had any performances where you didn't think he was going to win the fight, or you thought there was a chance that he wasn't going to win the fight. And I'm talking about like as the actual fight was taking place. He has had fights where, got clipped by Gamboa, got knocked down by Mean Machine, struggled a little bit versus Jose Benavidez. But for the most part, Terence Crawford has been extremely dominant in every fight. The fight versus Kell Brook, I had Kell Brook winning the first 2 rounds off of the jab, really boxing well. And then Terence Crawford flipped on a switch and got him up out of there. But like every fight, though, has been dominant for Terence Crawford. And, he's going to be 35 by the time this fight happens. I think he's still in his prime, fresh, hasn't taken a lot of punishment, hasn't really, been in a whole lot of wars. And he's always in shape, stays in the gym. He's a guy that takes care of himself, don't smoke, don't drink, don't be in a club partying all the time. I mean, Terence Crawford really lives a fighter's lifestyle. That's one of the things that I admire about him the most. His pedigree as a champion and as a fighter, the way he carries himself, his mindset is one of the things that I love about Terence Crawford the most. So I think he's kept himself up very well, and he's a young 35. He's a fresh 35. He's an in tune and well-oiled machine at 35. And I think he's going to be facing the very best version of Errol Spence Jr. I think he's going to be facing the strongest version of Errol Spence Jr. that we ever seen. Errol Spence will be, he turned 32 in March. He's a very strong and in prime, well-rounded and just in tune right now. Errol Spence is just really clicking right now. I think for Errol Spence, this is the perfect time to fight Terence Crawford because, of course, you unified 3 titles. This is, the only other title that's left out there Terence Crawford holds. He's the only one standing in the way of you accomplishing your ultimate goal, which is to become undisputed at 147. Errol Spence has been on this crusade ever since he was in contention for a championship. This is something that he's always talked about. If you go back to the post-fight, immediately after he beat Kell Brook in the ring, post-fight interview, he talked about, I want to be undisputed. That's all Errol Spence ever talked about, is becoming undisputed at welterweight. He did an interview with Brian Custer right before the Ugas fight, and Brian Custer asked him, what would you would have to finish this sentence for me at the end of this year or 2022, Errol Spence will be what? And Errol Spence said, one of the greatest welterweights that ever lived. And if you read between the lines, you can understand what that means. He knows he has to beat Terence Crawford to do that. And I just think, man, after everything Errol Spence has been through, where he's at right now, overcoming all of those things, and then, you know, of course you would not want to have you'd want to not have to go through those things, but when you do overcome that, it's kind of like you're thankful that you went through those things, because it builds a strength. He was already a mentally strong individual, a mentally tough guy. That's something that I always admired about Errol Spence. He always had that, but I think this strengthened him, knowing that I can survive that car crash, knowing that I can, you know, suffer a retinal tear and then still come back and be dominant. You know what I'm saying? To have that mental fortitude is incredible. And I think right now, Errol Spence, you know, you seen the type of shape that he was in the Ugas fight. Go back and look at Errol Spence versus Kell Brook at the weigh-in, and look at him versus Leonard Bundu, Chris Algieri at the weigh-in, and then look at him versus Ugas at the weigh-in. That's the best I've ever seen Errol Spence. He didn't look drained. He looked like he was extremely healthy. And that's just a testament to him keeping himself in shape outside of fight camp. And that's something that he's continued to do. I just saw a video, shout out to Oak Cliff Studios. I posted their video that they did on Frank Martin. It's like a documentary. I think they did part 1 and part 2, and Errol Spence is speaking in those the second documentary, you know, talking about how you know, him and Frank Martin, you know, how he, you know, he goes in there and trains with Frank Martin while Frank Martin is getting ready for his fight versus Nunes, because he know how it feel to be in a gym by yourself. It could be bored, it could be, you know, not very motivational. And you know, that's the current Errol Spence. He's still in the gym right now, you know, in hella shape, man, looking like goddamn Bruce Leroy. I told y'all, Errol Spence be cut up like a bag of dope when he on his shit. Man, this is just a different type of dude. And I just think all the way around the board, Errol Spence is just clicking on all cylinders. He's just at an elite level in every category. I think he's at his best, you know, in every category that he's ever been. You know what I'm saying? This, when you hit your prime, that's what happened when you hit your prime. Where the physical, the mental, the heart, you know, intellectually, wisdom, maturity, all those things just click. All of them just match up. You know what I'm saying? When you first come in a game, your athleticism and your physical ability be like up here, but your IQ and all that other shit, it be like, you know what I'm saying? And then certain shit, you know, kind of go. But when you hit your prime, like where Errol Spence is right now, everything is just at that level. You know what I'm saying? Everything at that level. And that's the version of Errol Spence that Terence Crawford is about to face. I think they're talking about October. Like I said, you know, Terence Crawford's birthday is in September, I believe. So he turned 35 at that time. So both guys in their prime, in my opinion. Both guys, you know, strong. You feel me? But I want to talk about this aspect of Terence Crawford having to face this version of Errol Spence and how he's going to deal with that, because I don't think, first and foremost, neither guy has fought anybody like the other. Errol Spence hadn't beat anybody like Terence Crawford, and Terence Crawford hadn't beat anybody like Errol Spence. So let's get that, you know, understood off top. However, there's an interesting, you know, thing to look at here. Let's just focus on 147. I don't think Terence Crawford has necessarily, I think the best overall, The best fighter Terence Crawford fought at 147 is Shawn Porter. That's a fact. But as far as fighting guys at the top of their game, the only two fighters that I feel Terence Crawford fought at the top of their game was Jeff Horn and Mean Machine. Mean Machine put up a decent little fight, but Mean Machine wasn't anybody that any of us viewed as an elite fighter, right? I think at best, Mean Machine, I would give him maybe a C plus B minus type of grade. And that's, I'm not trying to shit on Mean Machine. I think, you know, he can fight. He's a professional fighter. He can fight. But I would say Mean Machine he would be like a at best B minus type of guy. But I would lean more towards C plus, and that's not bad. You know, he was able to fight at a championship level versus Terence Crawford. Jeff Horn, coming off of the Manny Pacquiao victory, think he was at his best. You know, coming off a huge win, very controversial win, but he got the dub nonetheless. You know, very physically strong guy, but very little skill. So I'm gonna say, you know, I'm gonna say Mean Machine out of the guys that he fought at the top of their game. I'm gonna say Mean Machine was the best guy. He fought Kell Brook, who I still view as a very, very good fighter when he was at the top of his game. Kell Brook had been stopped multiple times, had been, you know, up and down in weight, had been out of the ring for some time. And, you know, he looked to be in decent shape leading up to the fight with Terence Crawford, but at the weigh-in, when he took his mask off, I was like, yeah, man, this shit ain't gonna be what I thought it was gonna be. You know what I'm saying? His face was all bony and shit. He looked like a goddamn skeleton, I ain't gonna lie to you. You know what I'm saying? Like, from the neck down, he looked good. You feel me? Like, he had abs and shit. You know, motherfucker was malnutrition, you know. All he had was muscles. You feel me? He didn't have, shit, everything else was gone. But when he took that mask off, that's when I really knew. I'm like, man, he drained beyond belief. You feel me? Like, I'm talking about cheekbones look like them bitches finna pop out. You dig what I'm saying? And then also he fought Shawn Porter, who I also view in a high esteem. Big fan of Shawn Porter. I think he's a really good fighter, but Shawn Porter wasn't at his best when Terence Crawford faced him. Shawn Porter was on his way out. You know, you had Kenny Porter talking about before the fight, I had already planned on stopping it. Him and Kenny Porter bumping heads. The whole training camp, there's videos of Kenny Porter fussing at Shawn, and they just not seeing eye to eye. Shawn Porter dipping off to go do his podcast and shit in the middle of training camp. That just, in my opinion, that wasn't the best Shawn Porter. And that fight was competitive. But I think Errol Spence, you know, I've seen Errol Spence face Kell Brook, in my opinion. Even though he was stopped by Triple G on his feet, never went down in that fight. You know, took some damage in that fight, but I thought that Kell Brook was still at the top of his game. You know, now you might have a different opinion, but me personally, I thought Kell Brook was strong. You can see it in the matchup with Errol Spence. He was strong. He was strong until he got broke down in the 11th round, but he was strong throughout that entire fight, and he put up a hell of a fight. Great account of himself. You know what I'm saying? I thought Errol Spence, and he fought Kell Brook in his hometown, not just overseas. He fought that man in Sheffield. That's Kell Brook hometown in Bramall Lane. Kell Brook grew up 5 minutes down the street from that stadium, Bramall Lane, in front of 30, 40,000 people. He fought that man over there in those elements, similar to what Devin Haney just did versus George Kambosos. You know, and I feel like he fought a very strong Kell Brook. In my opinion, Errol Spence fought Kell Brook when he was still elite in his prime, at his best, very strong. I feel like Errol Spence fought Shawn Porter at the top of his game, coming off, you know, championship fight with Danny Garcia, one of his biggest wins at 147, and Shawn Porter got up for that fight. It was a unification match. You know, it was a meaningful fight because it was a unification match. And Shawn Porter got up for that fight. He wanted nothing more than to defeat Errol Spence because for so long, Everybody was telling Sean Porter he was ducking Errol Spence, and he was. He knew he was. And he knew that when time came, he was going to have to put up or shut up. And in my opinion, that wasn't the best version of Errol Spence. But we ain't talking about that. Errol Spence fought the best version of Sean Porter. I think Errol Spence fought the best version of Yordenis Ugas, coming off the biggest win in his career. A big, strong welterweight. Don't look at the age. Look at what he done up until that point. Outside of the Sean Porter loss, which a lot of people thought Ugas won, he had won a whole lot of fights in a row. You know, Omar Figueroa, Sean Porter. Some say that he beat Sean Porter, Manny Pacquiao, and the list goes on. He beat a lot of guys. I felt like Errol Spence fought the best version of Yordenis Ugas coming off a Manny Pacquiao win, who had came off of a Keith Thurman win. You know, Mikey Garcia was undefeated, pound for pound, top 5 on everybody's list, at least all of the major lists. And, you know, yeah, the fight was at 147. That ain't Mikey Garcia's weight, but he called out Errol Spence. He wanted to smoke. He wanted to test his waters. Keep in mind, Mikey Garcia did beat a welterweight in Jesse Vargas, you know, so he showed that he can fight at that weight. But when Errol Spence fought him, he was undefeated, 39-0, you know, top 5 pound for pound. He beat Mikey Garcia at his best. You know what I'm saying? So I've seen Errol Spence beat guys, elite fighters, at the top of their game, coming off their biggest wins. Mikey Garcia was coming off, you know, Robert Easter Jr. win, Adrian Broner win. Like, he was running through shit. You know what I'm saying? He fought Mikey Garcia when Mikey Garcia was at the top of his game. But I haven't really necessarily seen Terence Crawford fight an elite fighter at the top of their game. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how Terence Crawford deals with a guy like Errol Spence, the elite of the elite. And this is the strongest version of Errol Spence in his prime at the top of his game. I think that's going to be one of the most interesting things to see, you know, what happens when he get in there with a guy who ain't going to back down, who going to fight fire with fire if he need to, who, if Terence Crawford turn it up to a level, Errol Spence going to turn it up to another level. And if he keep going, Errol Spence going to keep going until somebody dropping that motherfucker. You know what I'm saying? That's going to be one of the most interesting elements in this fight. And I really want to know what y'all think about how Terence Crawford going to deal with something like that. How do you think he going to react? Now, me personally, me being a huge fan of Terence Crawford and just knowing his temperament, I think he going to get up and he going to turn up and he going to go crazy. And I think, you know, he going to answer the bell. When shit get real, I think Terence Crawford going to answer the bell, and I think Terence Crawford going to be willing to go out on his shield if it got to go like that. You know what I'm saying? And Terence Crawford is one of those guys with that attitude, man. You know, hey, you hit me with a good shot, man. I want to get my get back. You know what I'm saying? And I think you will see that intensified in this type of matchup versus this type of fighter. You know, but y'all let me know what y'all think down in the comments, man. I thought this was just an interesting thing I was just thinking about, man. Like, how do you think Terence Crawford responds versus, you know, fighting a guy of this caliber in his prime at his best? And, you know, what type of response are you expecting from Terence Crawford? What type of energy are you expecting from Terence Crawford? Will we get the same Terence Crawford that turn up on these other dudes and just go crazy and go for broke? You know what I'm saying? With all disregard from anything that they sending back to him, just going there and go crazy? Or do you think we'll see a more conservative Terence Crawford? Do you think we'll see a Terence Crawford that's a little bit more cautious or a little bit more, you know, withdrawn? You dig what I'm saying? Y'all let me know what y'all think, man. Contender Regime Boxing. I'll holler at y'all boys, man.